I'd like to go ahead and cue this up. I'm Dr. Jeff Brown with the Merge Medical Podcast. I'm joined today by my co-host, Dr. Jeff Cole, and Pete Aman. Pete is the CEO of InSurgical, which produces reliable, efficient, cost-effective, single-use, large bone drills, including an oscillating drill, a reamer, and a reciprocating saw. Before I met you, Pete, I didn't know this was possible, but we've all thrown our hands up in the air and said, my God, the tray's not sterile, the drill's broken, the patient's already got an IV, I've already pre-opted them, and guess what? I'm an anesthesiologist, already blocked the patient, and now the case is canceled. So this is something we're really interested in. You know, Dr. Cole's an orthopedic surgeon. Pete, tell us about InSurgical.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me here today. Yeah, the really InSurgical is a kind of merging of two concepts, and the idea of single use, which you've seen plenty of single use products. In general, when you hear single use, it's usually a lower cost item, not so much with something larger electromechanical like a power tool, although you are seeing some other devices coming out now that are single use. The beginnings of our company was having a product that was a single-use power tool that someone had developed many years ago around the concept of just sterility and having that confidence of sterility and looking at it more as a backup type solution. What we've done with InSurgical is kind of merge two different things, a product and a service. So you also have seen reprocessing companies that are out there, and obviously there's large ones that Stryker acquired years ago. So it's Stryker Sustainability, that they're taking single-use devices, someone else's device, and going out and taking a dirty one and reprocessing it. Well, we kind of merged the two concepts. And the reason that we merged that concept, if we look at a single-use power tool and trying to get it to perform to the level that a surgeon really needs, but come in at a price point that really makes sense, really hard to do. So you're generally sacrificing on some level of performance if you're trying to do a pure disposable surgical power tool. So we looked at combining those two things, which is a much more complex business, frankly. But for the customer, it ends up with being a really attractive solution. So you have a very high-performing power tool that isn't sacrificing compared to what the traditional tens of thousands of dollars surgical power tool does for you. But you have that cost and convenience of having a sterile product that you open it up, you use it. If you have an issue, whether it's with our tool or some other tool, you simply open up another tool because it is a low-cost solution. So backups are automatic, that you would have backups sitting around, opposed to a power tool that costs, again, in the tens of thousands of dollars. You don't just have a bunch of extra ones sitting around just in case. So with that, we've been really excited. It's just been the last year and a half or so that we've really been in earnest selling this product, and the reception has been really good. A lot of times at first people are, the natural thing is they hear single use and power, and there's no way it's going to have the power and performance of traditional power tools. So we're always willing and eager to go do an evaluation, and people are always pleasantly surprised and shocked in some cases of how much performance there is in our tool. So that's a long way of getting to what we have today. It's what we call single-use recyclable power tools. So essentially, we deliver the tools clean, sterile. Customer uses the product, and then we provide the mechanism on site to collect that tool, store it there, and ultimately that tool makes its way back to us, and we're able to recapture value out of that tool. So then the cost per case ends up being extremely attractive. Power performance is extremely attractive, and all the uncertainties that every facility has, especially if you look at a smaller surgery center, but even the large facilities have uncertainty around, is the power tool going to be ready? Is it going to perform the way that I need? For the most part, those issues go away with our solution.
And when I first heard the concept, I thought, wow, are the existing products that are purchased, are they just way too expensive? But then I guess it did start to make a little more sense when you think of this. In my mind, it's just like a short-term rental. I mean, you're able to use that device over and over. I don't know how many times, how you QA that process, but I think that's how the model works, right?
Yeah, and one analogy we would use, so for one thing, we think of our product, we call it TaaS, Tools as a Service. So with software, you're very familiar with it today, SaaS products. And some of us, if you're younger, you don't know, but if you're older, in the days when I was a young businessman, even in small companies, you had a IT group that was part of your company, and you had servers that were part of what you had to buy, and this expensive software and licensing and all this headache that was involved with software just to run the most basic business. Today, you don't even contemplate that. You do everything online. You pay a monthly fee, and you do your software as a service. Well, we're tools as a service, so we get away from all that upfront cost, the maintenance, all the unknowns that come along with it, the daily processing of those tools, and just have a tool as a service. So the tool's coming out, open it up, you use it, you're done with it. If you were to have a glitch with that tool, you just open another one up and you use it. So it just really simplifies the use of that product. And modern type solutions, you think of Uber. So if you were going to work just a couple days out of the month and that's all you used your car for, right? Why are you paying for that capital to sit in your garage, the car, and pay for the service of it and the unknowns that you get a flat tire, you got something going wrong with it? Instead, it's you pay your fee, you get it, you use it, and you're done with it. And that's really what our solution looks like, which works. It's a complete no-brainer for anyone doing any type of erratic volume and you don't know what's going on. But even with the, doing 10 cases in a week, it still ends up being very, very efficient. And even at the highest end, and we just got our first big hospital customer this last week, and they're doing hundreds and hundreds of cases, but they're looking and saying, hey, if we do 20 or 30 cases a month with InSurgical, we just get rid of those delays that we have today, that even with the huge mass of power tools we have, we still have delays and headaches because of power not being available when we absolutely need it, and we can fill that gap.
Pete, you said it already, but I just want to emphasize it is quote unquote single use, but it's recycled. So to all the environmentalists watching, we're not making power tools and then throwing them in the trash, right?
And that was, and by the way, that was a problem with the whole single use disposable power tool concept, which was kind of the initial piece that we started with our company. Not only the cost considerations, but people didn't like, even if they were an extreme environmentally conscious person, the idea of taking two big power tools and throwing them into the medical waste stream, and it costs money because they pay on a per pound basis to throw away tools. So absolutely not. In general, with our tools, when they use it, when they're done with it, we provide the container for them to drop this into a bag and then sit on site, and then we collect it. So nothing is really going into the trash, and it's a very, very sustainable solution.
How many times can you recycle these things? What, 10 times, 20? Do you know the number?
Yeah, it depends. In general, our target is 20 to 30 uses. And every time that tool comes in, the other beauty of our program is it's tested and validated every single time before it goes in that package. So your traditional power tool, even though you paid, today we're seeing pricing on the newest power tool sets in $60,000 for a set of tools for large bone procedures. Now you're using it the 10th time. It's gradually degrading every single time you use it, right? Until you have some hiccup in the procedure, you just don't know when that's going to happen, or you start hearing noises and it's doing certain things. With ours, we test it, validate it, and it goes out. So whether it was the first use or the 20th use, if it's not ready for prime time, it doesn't make it back out in that package and get out in the field.
So Pete, I'm part of a 40-person group, 2 surgery centers, lots of total joints being done, and we have bought all of this equipment. It seems to me that if we had equipment go down, we just would say, okay, we're not going to replace that. Is that a strategy?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have. So if I go into there's not really an average customer, but the range of customer types when we first engage. In some cases, we go in and we're the solution. So they have tools that are older and they're looking to replace them, and they're either going to buy a new set of traditional power, or they buy us and now they're on our platform. But then you can have the other end of where, hey, they got 10 sets of tools, 4 of them they just bought a year or 2 ago, they still got some good life in them, and we're doing 10% of their procedures, right? We're filling in that gap. But now when the next power tool set goes down, instead of replacing that, now we're doing 25% of their procedures. They gradually scale up with ours. And frankly, once they start using our solution, that becomes more of the mindset, because they get used to how it offloaded SPD, for example. I mean, the SPD loves our tools because
No doubt.
if you look at a busy joint day at a surgery center in SPD, what they're doing both the day before and then the day of the procedure, anything you can do to offload them, they're going to love it.
Well, I think you've yet to scale this business, but I'm already thinking companies like MicroAir who see their profits maybe deteriorating would want to buy you. Maybe premature in that thought.
Yeah, I don't know that you're premature on that. I think that as we get out there more, we're getting more knocks on the door from various entities where they see where the industry's going. I mean, it's an interesting thing. We've been working on various parts of this solution for a while, but really, again, the single-use recyclable is just the last year and a half or so that we've really got it out there and selling in earnest. We kind of have a collision of our product and our solution meeting changing market dynamics to where the fit is becoming stronger and stronger. If we were to go back 2 or 3 years ago, to us it looked like a good solution. All of a sudden it's looking like a great solution because we're seeing in the total joint space out in the ASCs, customers are looking for how do we do more and more volume because we see the industry is going that direction. And how do we handle that and giving more and more strains on SPD. And when you look at COVID and what's happened after that, it's harder to fill jobs in that space. You just have more strains on that. And our solution is looking more and more attractive. And we're seeing a lot of movement in the industry going to what we've talked about internally for years, a SPD-free ASC. Right, having an ASC which is maybe not SPD free but SPD light, to where it's not as dependent on SPD as what's traditionally been the case. And if you're able to have, for the most part, kits of pre-sterilized, tested instrumentation, so not just power, but looking at everything that's involved with the joint, and your job in the ASC, you're just trying to crank out procedures, right? SPD is a necessary evil to be able to enable you to be able to do procedures, but if you didn't have to have that, that's not really what your core competency is. Your core competency is doing.
So Pete, let me focus on the SPD part of it, just for those that aren't necessarily clinically inclined surgeons or anesthesiologists, etc. SPD is Special Processing Department, and it typically consists of somebody making, I don't know, a few dollars more than minimum wage, and they're there to make sure that those devices that are going into patients or the tools that the surgeon's using are perfectly sterile, autoclaved, right? And those girls or guys get in there at 3 or 4 in the morning. They're trying to plan for a very busy day. You touched on this already, but this is often the limiting factor for these cases. And it's like one of the lowest trained, lowest paid persons. And then it can delay an OR that's costing, I don't know, what do they run now? $500 every 15 minutes to stand still, right? So then it makes me think, okay, well, you've got these drills and you mentioned like whole kits for like hips or whatever. What's the thought? Like, I can see a center like Ortho South or anybody for that matter going, hey man, we can go way beyond drills and reamers. I want this for everything. And I can eliminate the SPD department altogether, eliminate the upfront costs. There's no downtime. I mean, it's like you said, right? Speak to this because I'm an anesthesiologist, but this seems like an absolute no-brainer to expand your line, right?
Yeah. For us, we look at the bigger picture of what InSurgical can be and some of the pathways we're starting to go down. Power tools, and obviously expanding in the power tool space. Right now what we have is large bone power tools, very much focused on the joint space, total joints, but going to mid-tier size tools, getting into other procedures. Obviously that's a natural extension of what we're doing. But even non-powered instrumentation, when we look at that range of what we can do, and we look at what is the entire instrument kit you have when you're doing a total knee replacement, and what else could we include in our kit. And we're again being approached on various types of partnership type opportunities along those lines, because it's not just something now that we've had in our vision of what could be. We're having companies larger than ours come and talk to us about their vision and them seeing that as well. So we're excited about it. It's kind of a great combination of, we've prepared and we've done things to build our tool to a certain level of capability that's now broadly acceptable. And in some cases, some surgeons actually prefer our tool to the traditional tools because of the weight and power that we deliver from our tools. but also the industry is merging very nicely into what we're delivering to give us a much broader opportunity than maybe we would have seen 4 or 5 years ago.
Is there much more power per weight, per ounce? I envision maybe your tools are lighter than what I'm used to.
Yeah, they are. And when we compare power, right, we're taking the industry standard products, and part of the maturity of our business is having the instrumentation in-house to be able to objectively characterize our products and compare them to traditional power and be able to see. So even though that power tool that you're used to using and weighs 50% more than our tool, when we put it on the dyno, when we check how much torque it creates, we actually create more torque than that power tool. And at the end of the day, as a surgeon, that's what you care about, right? Is how much power you're trying to ream the acetabulum. Do I have enough power to be able to do that? And then the lower weight becomes a nice benefit that most surgeons didn't even think was an option. And then now they start using our tools. It's like, hey, that's kind of nice. You know, when I'm on my 5th procedure of the day that I'm lifting up this tool and it weighs another, 1.5 pounds less than what I'm used to, you start noticing that wear and tear is a little bit less on your body over time.
Well, this hits home for me is, as a hand surgeon, I might be putting in a K-wire, a pin that weighs nothing. Huh. And our center has made a capital investment. And what'd they go for? They went for the really heavy tools for the total joint guys. So I've got this big, heavy drill trying to do some kind of precision pinning. And it's harder. I've complained about it, but nobody's listening.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we get a lot of interest, I'll say, out of the surgeons that are in a similar space as you, because I don't think the industry, I think the volumes are lower, so the industry isn't necessarily catered to that, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space. So it's something that we're definitely looking at, and we have some users today playing with it, but we're also then looking as we go down the line to smaller tools, right? Because you need that combination. The bigger the tool is and you're trying to do some fine procedure in a smaller part of the anatomy, obviously a smaller tool is helpful if you have that as well, but lighter, of course, is going to be beneficial.
Hey, Pete, let's dial it back a little bit. Tell me about you, your background, previous experiences and or companies that you've led, because I'm loving the idea here, but I want to hear about you, your leadership here.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, I'll go back. I always have to recalibrate because time flies by, but I guess it's been about 25 years now that I've been in, I'll say, the startup world, and my career started much more in the high-tech space where things are very, very fast-moving. Windows for a new product is about 18 months, so if you come out and you take too long to develop your product, all of a sudden you missed it, and you're working on the next one. But startups is my world. So I've loved startups, and I came from initially being in the finance, some more financial analysis and planning and strategizing from the, what do all the numbers add up to, and does this plan versus that plan make more sense? And then getting into product marketing and then operations and then managing an engineering team. And with all that, kind of a jack of all trades and hitting all areas of the business to where then was in more leadership positions in my last couple startups. A company called TaaS Technology years ago was my last non-medical company that I was in. But part of my jump over into the medical world, I was hoping to take some of that speed and agility that I was used to in the tech world and bring that in, which is a harder to do than actually say because of the regulatory environment that's involved. But we do push that in our organization, and there's always the kind of push and pull and give and take, if you will, to make sure obviously we're following all the rules and meeting what we have to do from a regulatory side. But with that, if I look back and I look at our drill today versus what we were delivering just 12 months ago, greatly improved. I mean, we're continuously improving our product. That's one of the beauties, again, with our model. So you as a customer, if you're using our drill today, because of our model, you're getting the latest and greatest over time as it comes to you. So you didn't buy a System 7 and now you got to wait till you shell out tens of thousands of dollars to go to that next version. It just comes to you with our solution. But with that, from my side, again, that background in startups and going through the pains and being the little guy, I'll say my experience being the little guy going up and fighting against these huge entrenched companies that most people would look at and say, you have no chance to go up against that company. When I was in semiconductor test equipment, and there's companies Teradyne and Advantest that are multi-billion-dollar companies, and well, there's no way you as this little company can take market share from them, but we did. And then ultimately those companies come around and looking to acquire you. That's a fun place to be. But I enjoy that competitive side. I enjoy going and being the little guy and going up against it and making things happen. So that's the common thread. And again, from my side, I'll say I'm kind of the jack of all trades and can do a little bit of everything as is necessary. The fun part is, like with our business now, we're in that mode now as we're adding people, and then I'm always looking at what can I step away from and bring someone else in to fill that gap. But knowing those things and knowing the timing of how to do those things, that's kind of my experience that I bring in to be able to handle those elements of starting the business, but then also growing the business and doing that successfully.
How about the founding team? Was this your idea, or was there another founder that sought you out?
Yeah,
what happened there?
The beginning of it is I got, I'll say, pulled into this from a group of investors that had the idea around the single-use disposable piece. And so I came in and there was a group of founders around that. And then really this is described to most people as really a tale of two companies. So even though legally we're the same company from the beginning, that single-use disposable started to see the weaknesses of it. I saw what people liked about it, but I also saw the downside. So then from there, I'll say primarily myself kind of looking at this broader single-use recyclable concept. And with that was really more myself, and now bringing other people into the mix now to help kind of launch that and bring that and move that forward.
Everybody thinks it's hard to have a good idea. It's really not. It's not even hard to have a prototype. What's hard is to have widespread commercialization. Sounds like you've already got some market penetration, but what is your plan to scale this going forward?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And that's going back to the industry differences from what I came from in past lives in technology versus this industry. I described it the other day as kind of going and pushing through molasses, right, to try to get market share as you're trying to go up. As on paper, you can look and say, yeah, the product is good. And now when you go talk to an individual customer, everything looks great, like they like it. But to actually get the purchase order to move it that next mile, I mean, there's just so many barriers. And the bigger the customer is, the more barrier, when you talk about GPOs or VACs, all the bureaucracy that's built in that is just, frankly, favors the big mega companies, right? So as a smaller company to break through that and get traction is a huge challenge. But with that, we are doing that. And part of the commercialization side, we're going now what I talk about kind of individual facility onesie twosie, right? So between us directly and sales rep 1099 sales rep types, opening those doors and getting those initial opportunities. And now that momentum's really starting to grow. Just got 2 new customers this last week. We're excited about that, but really also engaging with entities that give us the ability to scale much quicker. So entities where we can leverage their larger sales force, that's becoming something that when we look at 2005 and especially going into 2026, that we expect a bigger and bigger portion of our sales to come through those types of entities. And those entities take a whole range of views, and part of that, I can't necessarily talk about some of those partners that are out there on that side, but they're entities that have already cut through the molasses, if you will, and they're able to then now kind of pull our product alongside other products they have into the customer, and it becomes easier for them to take the risk now when they see the traction that we're having today. So kind of enabled that by our success in the last year or so to where now those bigger partner opportunities are becoming more real for us, and we're going through some of the discussions and negotiations now in some of those avenues. But that's what we expect to have more of, and I'll say more of those opportunities where we're selling in bulk, if you will, right? We might sell a bundle of 1,000 tools because then those are going out through that other entity into the individual facilities. And we see that happening more and more as we get into a little bit later into this year.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a few that maybe you're already talking to, like maybe Health Trust or surgery partners that run or are involved with large number of outpatient surgery centers.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, to me, it sounds like such a great idea. If you could just get your foot in the door and somebody listen to you for 30 seconds, so it makes sense to piggyback. If somebody's already, like you said, cut through the molasses and got themselves in the door, right?
Yeah,
it's a fantastic idea. Where are you guys at in terms of like fundraising, valuations, and you taking outside investors and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we're going through that right now, in fact. And in fact, we have it'll be interesting to talk to you guys in a couple months and see where we are on this, because we have, I'll say, two different pathways that are emerging, and some is more in one of those pathways is more in line with where we've been. I'll say more of an incrementalism approach, so relatively smaller dollars that take us to kind of that next inflection point. So dollars that would take us through the next 12 to 18 months that then, increase the valuation and then look at where we go from there. But we are being approached from a range of parties, not just one, about larger dollar amounts coming in sooner rather than later, and would allow me to go from what I talk about going from a, maybe I've been a crawl and get to a slow walk today in terms of the speed I would like to go, and allow us to take that and go to more of a sprint or a run sooner rather than later. So those two different pathways are emerging. In some cases you're talking a handful of millions, the other ones you're talking in the tens of millions that would take us to a whole different level. So we're looking at both sides and having both of those discussions, but absolutely we are in that zone where we need that additional funding, or we desire that outside funding to take us to move to that next step. It's a matter of what it looks like in terms of how big it is, and with some of those other larger scenarios, there's other pieces of the puzzles that start coming together as well in terms of other partnership type things that could be wrapped into some of those things. So not only dollars, but also other strategic elements that allow us again to move much quicker.
Where you've been as far as fundraising and where you are now, do you consider that seed, or are you in an A round?
No, we did. So I would say what we did a couple years ago, we considered that an A round, and that was again taking more of our prototype and being able to convert that to a real product and take it to market. And now we're kind of in the end of that phase and going to the next phase. But it's hard, especially if I go back 20-something years ago, the definitions of what's a A round and what does that mean? What's a venture capital entity and where do they invest and what's that mean today? Today, the VCs are moved into what I would consider private equity territory, where they talk about the revenue being in many millions, if not tens of millions, in some cases wanting you to be profitable, whereas the old days, the venture capitalists were coming in and sometimes you had a picture on a napkin and they were investing in that. And today, most of the VCs aren't doing anything close to that. So it's hard to see where they all fall. But with some of the investors we're looking at now, it would be kind of an A or B, A plus or B round, I guess, is kind of the zone we're looking at today.
What about like minimums and that kind of thing? Valuation?
Yeah, so for individual investors, and it's still open right now to, I'll say, smaller investors, with the minimum being $100,000. That's the smallest we would want to take today from an individual investor. Because really, as we've looked, what I talked about, those two different pathways that are emerging in terms of what the ultimate round looks like, we're using a convertible note in the near term to bridge us, to give us a little more flexibility before we make that final decision on path A or B. So with that and the convertible note, and on that plan, it's right now the plan is we would raise up to $2 million on that convertible note, $100,000 being the minimum on that note.
No, it's good. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, I almost on purpose don't study a lot before we do these, because I like to be surprised. I like to kind of learn as we go. I did look at the pitch deck and notice that there's really 3 slides that talk about benefits, and I haven't had a chance to try to kind of combine what's there. Do you want to kind of just review where you feel the benefits are? I mean, I'm seeing things like increased efficiency, reduced cost. There's another slide that just talks about the power. I think that's a good point. I think we've touched on most of that.
Yeah, so it's the benefits when we go through, and what most people don't realize, and when we try to line out for them, is some of the cost benefits, because it is I'll say apples to oranges comparison from a financial side. So we're filling a need. So for the facility, I need to do a hip replacement procedure. I need power to do that. But on the one hand, what I'm used to doing is spending tens of thousands of dollars for this capital equipment and then maintaining that, replacing batteries, doing everything that comes with owning capital equipment, tracking that capital equipment, maintaining that capital equipment, and paying every single time I use that equipment to reprocess it. So we try to put together a cost comparison to show that versus ours, which is a little more black and white in terms of what you're paying on a per case basis, but to show you that overall, our cost per case is actually lower than that traditional power tool. Because if you go and you look at the traditional power tool sales guy, and if he's in there talking to the same people we are about the customer, or they're already starting to use our tools, he says, well, why do you want to pay, $400, $500 a procedure for InSurgical? You can buy mine, and sure, you spend, $120,000 on these 2 sets of tools, but after you do, X hundreds of procedures, now you've already paid for it, and now it's free. And it's not free, but that's what that sales guy has to do. So we try to put together a model out and go through all the costs that you truly have with traditional power tools to show what that left side of the equation versus the right side of the equation looks like. And starting with, yes, you have the cost of the capital equipment. So if you're buying 5 sets of a competing power tool set, and that's going to cost you, let's say, $250,000 initially, but then you also have batteries that go dead after, 40, 50, 60 cycles of that heat getting sterilized over and over again. Now the batteries start to fail. So it's commonplace that you're going to replace those batteries every year or so, or you're going to deal with the fact that the batteries go dead mid-case and you're having to pop those on and off. You have the reprocessing cost every single time you use those power tool sets. You have the cost of capital, that if you write a check for $250,000 today, you borrowed that or you did something with it, but essentially you have a cost that has to do with getting that big chunk of dollars up front today. There's that cost of capital. In most cases, you might borrow or do a lease or something, and you're paying for that in that program. And then you have the cost of delays. And we have studies that have been done outside with AORN where they took different facilities that did 5 or 10 cases a week, facilities that did 30, 40 cases a week, and we look at how many power tool sets did they have and how often did they have a delay because of power tool sets weren't available. And it ends up being a couple percentage points in terms of the number of cases and how often they have those delays. And when you have those delays, how much does it cost, right? We were talking earlier about what's the cost per minute of OR time. So when OR is just sitting there not being used, how much is that costing you? We factor all those things in to come and be able to say, our cost per case is $400. Well, your cost that you're paying today is $600 or $650 or whatever those numbers are. But we also create that model to where the customer can modify for their nuances of their organization. So that's a big thing of just looking at the dollars and cents that are involved with ours versus theirs. But then there's the other part, which is just the convenience factor, right? When you're scheduling that case and you just know you have power, and there's no questions on do you have power that's available. It's just one less thing that you have to worry about as you're planning cases. And then we talked about the power and performance, the lightness, the ergonomics of the tools, all those other benefits that come with our solution, not to mention the fact, again, as our tool is improving over time, and part of those improvements are coming from users like yourselves, right? If you're using the tools and you're saying, hey, this is great, it would be nice if it could do X, doesn't mean next week we're going to make that change, but we're listening to that and we hear that multiple times from different surgeons, and we try to get more details on it, and it could be a year later, now you're seeing that tool with that little enhancement that you talked about is rolled into the device.
Yeah.
This is great. I love this. If I can extrapolate a little bit, maybe this is a pipe dream, but can you imagine a surgery center or even a hospital that doesn't even have an autoclave, that doesn't even have an SPD? And you start to Jeff's grinning right here for those.
Well, I was going to add autoclave to the list of things that see the wear and tear. I don't know if you mentioned it, but
the cost of running that thing,
I
right?
founded a surgery center. We lived through an autoclave going out. That was not fun.
No.
And it was quite expensive. It was an old autoclave, and we couldn't get parts, and so that's just one more piece of the puzzle there.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right, Jeff. I mean, I think, on-demand delivery of this, we could talk maybe offline, because I've got somebody I'd like to introduce you to that has that in the works.
Yeah. I wish we could talk about that online, but I know where you're going. This just makes a ton of sense, Pete. I mean, the efficiency that you could create. Then when I'm thinking through this in my head, so you're in Austin, Texas, right?
Yep, correct.
So I want to do this in Memphis, Tennessee. Walk me through. I'm using the drill. I'm reaming out an acetabulum in Memphis. Where does it go? And let's say you get contracts in Minnesota. Where does it go, and how does it get back to the site?
Yep. So today, all of that would come back to Austin. So in Memphis, what we would deliver is, so it depends on the most basic program would be you just pay as you go. So if you had 3 cases you were doing next week, you would order from us. We would have tools that are sitting there in the facility, but we would also have the return totes on site. So they're a return container that's set up that has everything you need for that return of that device. So you do your, let's say you had 3 cases on a Wednesday. Every time when you're done with that case, instead of the operator taking that tool that was dirty and putting it on the table and it goes to SPD, instead they take that drill, they drop it into the bag that we provided, they seal the bag, and it goes into our tote, and it sits in that tote. When that tote is full, they close it up, it's already pre-labeled, and then that tote comes back to us. So everything you need is already on that, and then the dirties flow back to us, and any new tools are coming in the front door, and essentially dirties coming out the back. As we move through our programs, once customers are using that, we like to move them to our longer term programs where now you're signing on and you're saying, okay, we're doing, 8 cases a month. And we come up with the program that says, for 8 cases a month, here's how many tools we need to support that program. And we sign on to a longer term agreement, which, by the way, brings down the cost per case from your side. But it also brings the convenience way up, because instead of you now placing a PO every time you want tools, we're flowing tools in all the time. So we make sure if you're doing 8 cases next week, well, you probably have 12 tool sets that are sitting there. And then every week we're sending you new tools. We're just touching base with you, whoever's the OR manager, whoever's in charge, and they say, hey, we got 4 more drills and 3 more oscillating saws that are sitting back there, and we got these cases coming up. Okay, we ship more tools out. So you have tools that are just coming in all the time. When they're dirty, they go into those return totes, they come back to us, and now it's just a flow that's coming in and out. And then you get your charge. Depends how we charge. There's different ways how we charge that, but essentially that's separated, so you're not worried about placing orders on a regular basis. It's really, again, a service. Tools as a service. Tools are flowing in. When we have those programs, we take any of the capital items that are needed, like batteries, chargers, pin drivers. There's certain attachments that go onto the tools that you keep there, and you sterilize there and just peel pack. All those are warranted over that entire term. So again, there's no surprises that a year later, oh, I got to write a check for X amount for these new batteries or for these things. Everything is covered under that whole program. You know exactly what your cost per case is, and all that comes back to us. That's what the near term looks like. Over time, and we're already in discussions on what our second facility will look like, but envision that we would have, let's call it 4 or 5 facilities around the country, so that it's much more regional. So now you're not making as long of a trip. So if we look at the West Coast and we look at California, well, those products are probably going to a location in Phoenix or Utah, somewhere close by. So now for us, we become that much more efficient, because the turn time from a dirty tool coming back to us, getting processed and going back out, that's a much smaller loop. I mean, we can see that in Memphis, for example. We might have something in the southeast that's servicing that area, so that products that are used, like we're starting to get activity in Atlanta. So if we look at that area in general and it starts becoming hot, now we create a facility there. But for the user, it doesn't really make much difference. It's really for us that we become more efficient, because what we do, we bear that burden, and we ship stuff that much earlier if the location is different, is longer in terms of that distance from us to them, to make sure that you have enough tools. But over time, that just becomes more efficient for us, because we don't have to give as much of a cushion there, because if you're within 24 hours to be able to ship new stuff, we're able to do that very, very efficiently.
Well, Pete, we can tie you directly to a logistics partner here in Memphis.
Yeah.
We've got somebody we can have you communicate with. Is there any clearances that you need? I mean, you're good to go as far as doing business. FDA stuff, nothing like that.
Correct. Yeah, we have all that released. And part of that is we have to do that on a regular basis when we change anything. So right now, when we are looking at that packaging, then we have to go through a range of validations to be able to show that the tool is packaged correctly, that it maintains sterility, that we can ship it. That's probably one of the more complicated things that people don't realize, and especially with the power tool or kind of odd, larger, heavier device, is that you have to be able to verify that I can shake and beat up that packaging, external packaging, and the tool inside remained sterile, so we didn't puncture a bag, we didn't damage the tool, etc. So every time we make any change on any of that, we have to go through a new validation to be able to confirm all of those various things. But the core tool and the packaging today, all of that is released, and then anytime we make a change, we have to go through that new validation.
As you go from one version of the tool to the next, are there certain things you're trying to standardize? Like I'm thinking of airplanes where people don't always realize that you look at an airplane, 6 months ago, it had lots of different parts. They're always rotating parts to make an airplane that actually flies. I mean, if you re-engineer some of the guts of this thing, are you trying to do that within the same form factor?
Yeah. So yeah, you brought up a great point, and part of it is just from the cost from our side of the new verification and validation. Anytime we change any component, we have to go through a process to make sure we didn't change something that was unintended, right? So when we go improve something, but in general, yes, the less you have to change, the better. So if we have an external housing of the tool, we don't want to have to change that to change something else internally. And we're going through that all the time on the drill, for example. We've made a range of changes that just make it better in a range of different ways, and we want to limit how many of those adjustments we have to make, because multiple things. One, it's costly from our side. If we have to change tooling to be able to do a plastic injection mold that's different, that costs us money. But it's also, as you change things, again, there's always the probability, and in most cases there is some sort of impact that you didn't plan for, right? I changed this because it's going to make it lighter. Okay, that's great. But now you go do some other testing and you see that something breaks easier. So you got to go back and verify that you haven't done anything wrong. Now we're already looking at the next generation tool. So with that, now we're looking at kind of bigger changes. And when we make this bigger external change, what are all the other things we want to modify? But doing all those things in one swoop versus the incrementalism. The incrementalism, we usually try to look at what's the core thing we're trying to improve, and how do we minimize what other parts we have to change to get to that hoped for end result.
Is everything made here in the U.S.?
Primarily. There's a mix of things, and it depends on the components. Some components, they're pretty darn hard to find in the U.S. All the final assembly test, verification, validations done in the U.S., and the bulk of the content is U.S. made, but it is a blend.
I wanted to ask about competitors to this. I have not seen anybody else do this for surgical instruments, but I've seen disposables for everything else, including some anesthesia equipment, which is, I was resistant to at first, but it's been great. But anybody chomping at your heels that you're having to fight in the ORs?
No, there's been over the years, again, if you look at a single-use disposable, there's companies that have come out that had a disposable that have all the problems I talked about before. It generally is not to the level of performance
inferior
that a U.S.
quality.
surgeon wouldn't use it. So we've seen companies that might set up shop in the U.S. and then they bring it in from outside, and then try to make it appear as if it's a U.S. product, but it's not. And again, there's sacrifices there. The nice thing is when we look at the single-use recyclable piece, I mean, we have a lot of patents now, and it's not just one. It's now I think we have 10 or 11 patents that have been issued over a range of different, both physical components as well as methods. So we're building a pretty good moat around what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that someone couldn't try to do something in the same general vein, but they're going to have to take a lot of zigs and zags to try to get something out there without violating some of our patents.
Gotcha.
So we're excited about that piece as well.
Excellent. Jeff, anything else you want to cover? Pete, we've covered a lot. We've been talking for about an hour. This is about the time where I ask my guests if there's anything important they'd want our listeners to know. Keeping in mind, we're assuming most of our listeners are physician entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, I think we covered a lot. I'm trying to think if there's any key points that we missed, and I don't think there is, because I think some of the more exciting things are where we're going in the future, some of the options we have, and some of the partnerships. But we did touch on those things, so I think we've hit most of the items that I would want to touch on.
Well, I love it. It's OR tools as a service. In surgical, OR tools as a service. I can see this reducing labor costs, reducing OR delays, improving patient care, and you've really done everything we ask our guests to do. That's improve patient care, improve or at least help physicians do their job, and at least have the potential for physicians to gain financially by investing in the projects that we showcase. So with that, I'd like to close things out. I'm Dr. Jeff Brown with Dr. Jeff Cole and the CEO of InSurgical, Pete Aman. Pete, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both. I really appreciate you guys having me here today.
Yeah.
It's been good
Very
fun.
good.